My name is Eric Browning. I'm the building official for community planning and development with the City and County of Denver. And we are leading the 2021 code adoption process. Some folks on this call are probably intimately familiar with that. Others may not be as familiar, and that's perfectly fine. And let me go ahead and introduce a few of the other folks or hand it on over. Christy Collins, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Christy Collins. I am a member of Eric's team working in CPD on various sustainability initiatives that we have going, including as relate to energy and the Denver Green Code and the IECC in 2021 code adoption process. I will hand off to Courtney.
Hi, I'm Courtney Anderson. I'm with the City and County of Denver as well, and I'm an administrator for Net Zero Energy New Buildings at Homes with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I will hand it off to Erica with Noresco.
Great, thanks, Courtney. My name is Erica DeVello, and I'm a product manager for Noresco, working on building energy codes and compliance improvement. So with that, John, I'll let you take it.
Yes, hi, my name is John Arndt. I'm with Noresco. I work with Erica and others in our Boulder office, but I am based out of San Francisco. I've been involved with codes and standards for quite a long time, 15 years. Have experience with California code and Washington code as well, so kind of bring a holistic perspective. And I'm a mechanical engineer by background.
Excellent. Okay. And with that, Christy, let's go ahead and turn it over to you for an overview of the process that we'll be working on over the series of these meetings and today.
Great. I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second, please, to get that up. Okay, so I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about why we're here. We are going to be talking about energy goals, the IECC, the Denver Green Code, our process for 2021, and what we're trying to accomplish by adding this working group process. So I think it's important to just start by saying that codes are central to how we can influence how new buildings impact our greenhouse gas emissions. And often we focus on our mandatory codes, but the voluntary Denver Green Code is a great opportunity for us to help this process along as well. So we arrange these working groups so that we can talk about ideas beforehand and advance the codes as effectively as possible. So what does this mean for the energy codes and codes in general? Courtney will talk a little bit more about the work that the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, I'll call them CASR moving forward, has been doing with the community. But I just wanted to touch on the fact that in 2020, the CASR team met with the community through a series of task force meetings and put together goals for Denver, including greenhouse gas emission goals, starting with goals that start to land in 2025. We know that buildings and homes contribute more than 60% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. So they're really important in the context of a whole host of other things that are really important as well. In that plan, developed with the community, goals were laid out, which include goals to get new building construction to zero net energy outcomes by 2030, which is a pretty quick timeline. We tend to focus on our mandatory codes, but sometimes it can feel daunting to just make the jump straight into the mandatory codes. And so we've added this Denver Green Code voluntary code opportunity, and I like to call it a Denver Green opportunity as opposed to a code. It's not a list of rules that every project has to follow, but it is intended to act as a beacon for new buildings so that we can find the way together towards achieving those goals that the community has for building performance. We want to make sure that through this process, we consider not only the environmental impacts, but also the social and economic impacts of the work that we do, because all of those factors act together to make a strong and viable community. And I'll stress probably multiple times, the Denver Green Code contains choices. So it's voluntary. It has multiple different paths that can be taken. And within the as written path, all of the provisions that we will be building towards in our conversation today, there are electives. So don't be afraid to throw out ideas. That's the goal here. And ideas just create more options. The 2019 Denver Green Code was the first iteration. It was the start. It was a beginning. It's a lot of work for a community to embrace and adopt a new code. And so we had modest expectations for that new beginning. But in that 2019 Denver Green Code, we introduced this voluntary incentivized code to raise the bar with lots of options and different paths. So we know that we love Denver as it is today. And the goal is really to figure out, what is it that we love about Denver? Why do we want to stay here? How do we make it a place that we want to stay in, that we all choose to live in for the future? How do we not only limit the harm that our buildings do, but also grow the good that our buildings do in contributing to Denver's evolution? Because we're not bystanders when we develop new projects, we're active participants. So the working groups are introduced because our typical code adoption process usually brings us to committees who help to make recommendations for what we should bring to City Council to be adopted as our new codes. But again, that can be a pretty abrupt transition. And so we're here today to encourage you to think bigger and bring us ideas. Those ideas can be for the IECC, that things that we think could be mandatory in 2021. They can be ideas for the Denver Green Code, for things that we think should be for future code cycles, and can just be options in a voluntary code today to introduce ideas. 2021 is just one step in a long process. We're here for the long view. We want to engage in a conscious evolution of the Denver community, not just letting Denver become whatever it becomes, but really have these ideas and this bigger vision and create this bigger vision with your input, so that we don't only solve problems that we identify, we also build towards a holistic vision that we really believe in. We also know that things have to be made tangible. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into the weeds on this diagram, but what I will say is that code compliant new construction today it degrades our environment over time. And I think we all kind of know that. So we have to find a way to get to the other side where we're building towards a longer term viable community. Positive net energy is one of the components of that. So we're here to talk about energy because energy is huge. If we don't solve energy, that's the biggest piece in the puzzle. So think big, think about the bigger ramifications of what we're suggesting, and just keep in mind the whole time that no idea should be held back because it's a spooky idea to think about making mandatory. The Denver Green Code is an opportunity for us to just have priorities addressed in a voluntary code where everything is a choice. And just a reminder, let's think about the whole picture as one integrated whole. We can't achieve any of our goals without addressing all three together. Know that each site and each project offers a unique opportunity in the whole of the bigger Denver community. We should not be afraid to think about the complexity of that. We'll advance the code faster if we can embrace that complexity and not try to find a one size fits all for every site, not think about sites as islands, but think about them together in one community. Ultimately, we're just looking towards finding the way towards Denver's potential, figuring out what the potential is and finding the way together to achieve that potential. So with that, and I'll just say, we're not here to present an answer. We're here to work with you to find the path forward. So with that, I'll hand over to Courtney, and she'll talk more about some of the work that the CASR team has done to date and some of the quantified goals. Thanks.
Thank you, Christy. Let me just pull this up. Great, and thank you so much. I think that was a really great introduction to why we are all here and kind of our long-term goals on that. So I'm just going to briefly speak about the energy goals that our office, as well as the city of Denver, has. So I think it's really helpful to understand that Denver's building stock. So homes and buildings in Denver actually account for 64% of greenhouse gas emissions. I think we all think of transportation as the #1 contributing factor, but within Denver itself, we're really at 64% are homes and buildings. So 15 for single family homes, and then 49% is the majority of commercial, multifamily, and industrial. So the goal of Denver is net zero energy new construction by 2030. So to kind of put it into perspective, 40% of our building stock will be new construction by 2050, which really can influence what we discussed today, can really influence the new future building stock and how those buildings will perform. So here's a really interesting map, and I think it's helpful to see where Denver sits in with other states and cities that are developing net zero energy codes and policies for new buildings. So these green states or circles for cities, those represent places that have set goals to reach net zero energy new buildings, and those that have already passed significant first steps towards that goal. Denver is actually in the middle of the pack of these other jurisdictions because of the energy and efficiency requirements that we've had in 2019 code to make commercial buildings 15% more efficient than the IACC 2018, and residential buildings 10% more efficient. This map is very similar, but it looks at the electrification codes and policies in new buildings. So there's a lot more cities and states, especially you can see in California, but there's kind of two different tiers. The dark blue represents more aggressive states and cities, where the light blue indicates the less aggressive, where cities have identified building electrification as a policy that they're pursuing. So Denver, we are in a less aggressive among the light blue cities and states that you see, because we're at the beginning stage of considering electrification ready policy in 2021 code. So you can see on this slide here, you've got to the left, you've got commercial and multifamily, and then to the right, you have residential. So it shows our path to net zero energy by 2030. So you can see where the 2019 codes sit and the projection that we need to get in 2030. So there'll need to be incremental steps along the way to achieve that goal. And finally, I think it's helpful to understand what Denver's net zero energy definition is. So it's a new building or home that is highly energy efficient and fully powered from on-site and off-site renewable energy. So there's really 4 foundations to this definition. So highly energy efficient buildings. So buildings that use target EUIs or target ERIs for homes, so that buildings can perform as designed for what's practical for that building type. The second item is all electric. So having all electric equipment in buildings can help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from each building. The third item is powered by renewable energy and electricity. So this is on-site or off-site renewable energy. And the target is by 2050, the grid will be 100% renewable. So it really ties into the importance of having all electric equipment in the homes. And lastly, the fourth item is providers of demand flexibility for the grid. So it's taking into consideration energy storage, grid integration, and flexibility to respond to grid signals. So, you know, I think we all should remember these points and these definitions as we further our conversations today to define Denver's goals and visions. So thank you. And I'm going to pass it back to Erica.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and launch a quick poll to get an idea of who's in the room today. Wouldn't mind taking a minute to answer that. And Courtney, I'm going to go ahead and post the mural board into the chat if you want to give an explanation while we gather those responses to the poll.
So as you're all doing this poll, like Erica said, she's posting something in the chat right now, and it's called a mural board. And it's going to take us to like a collaborative whiteboard for ideas and concepts. So I'll be screen sharing on my side so you can kind of follow along. But as you're clicking the link, you're going to be asked, you're either going to be assigned an animal, a random animal that can represent you, or you can enter your name. And you know, we encourage you to enter your name if you feel comfortable with that. You can participate in whatever language you prefer. There are instructions in both Spanish, and then each headline, each title has a Spanish translation next to it. So there's gonna be different categories, and we'll be leading the conversation from one category to another. So please do your best to try to like participate in what we're discussing now, so we can have a really collaborative experience here. And just to kind of go over the basics, and maybe I will start screen sharing now so you can see what my screen looks like. Can you all see my screen all right? Let's see. So to make a comment, it's pretty easy. So we're going to be, again, kind of going category by category, and we are all going to focus adding comments into the code concepts added during working group. And all you do is you double click to get a sticky note, and then you start typing, and you can see that live. So you double click with your left part of the mouse, and then you can drag your comment also by holding down your left mouse or left side of the mouse to make a comment. So we're going to add items here between Denver Green Code and IACC. Please don't delete or modify anyone else's comments. You know, everyone's comments are valid, so you know we will all review them mostly in the third meeting, but this is a place to really generate everyone's ideas. And if you need a reminder, there are instructions at the top here. So just about left clicking to create a sticky note, moving a note, just zooming in and out. So I think that kind of covers it. So I will be screen sharing here so you can all follow, but I heavily encourage you to participate within the link to create your own notes as we go through the conversation.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Erica, we still see the survey on the screen or the poll. Can we go ahead and end that? Looks like we have a nice variety of attendees today. I'm very happy to see that. I think folks can see that we've got a good spread. So after this, I think we'll be able to close this poll, and folks will need to just X the poll on their screen if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, it takes up the middle of your screen. And just to answer one of the questions that came in the chat, you do not need an account to use this mural board. everyone can enter, and we encourage you to do so. The one other thing I would mention, Courtney, is after we give folks an opportunity to add some information and we start discussing some of these, we'll definitely need to zoom in a little bit. I know on my screen it's pretty hard to see, but let's give folks an opportunity to do so. And sorry for the interjection. I'll turn it back over to the folks running this. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so, and thank you, Courtney, for that explanation of Mural. It is a new platform that we're trying out for these working groups. So just to start us off, the format of this working group is really a goal of having more of a conversation of how we can achieve Denver's goals. Currently, we have proposals that would roughly align us with Denver's IECC goals, but we do feel a little light on the DGC concepts. So we'll be running through all the concepts that are maybe a little bit slightly more complex to receive input, but we also want to gather other concepts that would help us get the DGC on the 2024 IECC trajectory path. So I would encourage you all to put all your ideas out on the Mural board for the DGC and the IECC amendments. And then at the end, if time allows, we can talk through them or reach out to you with additional questions at the end or follow it after this meeting. We will have about 15 minutes per category, and then we'll have the option at the very end to address additional topics as well. So as Courtney mentioned, she kind of walked you all through the net zero energy definition of highly energy efficient, all electric, powered by renewable energy and demand flexibility. These are the categories that you'll see in each of the on the Mural board. So I think we should go ahead and get started. And John, if you'd like to kick us off, if we could start in the highly energy efficient category, walking us through some of the city staff concepts and previous NBI proposals that we'd like to highlight for this. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A. There's also the chat that we'll be trying to monitor and field questions to John. And then at the end of the presentation, I would encourage you to also raise your hand and ask questions directly. So with that, John, I'll let you take it from here. I think you are muted.
Okay, thank you, Erica, and the rest of the group here. So we are focusing here on energy efficient measures and options for commercial buildings, primarily new construction, although some of these could potentially apply to existing buildings and alterations or retrofits as well. So I'm going to be going over some design options that we've and code measures that we've considered for both the Green Code and the Denver's IECC, or the base code. The first one, if you notice on the left column, HVAC minimum efficiencies. This one actually nicely was positioned next to this calibration. I'll describe how these two are related. So for this one, there are some credits available in the Denver code towards meeting the point goals for commercial buildings, and Denver has planned to restructure those so that projects can potentially get more points for certain instances, and has calibrated or aligned the targets with the energy efficiency goals for those buildings. Each of the points corresponds roughly, I believe, to a 1/4 percentage point reduction in energy use. So on the left-hand side, HVAC minimum efficiencies, there are especially for buildings that have package units that don't have central systems. This could be a small office building, most retail buildings, warehouse. There is a constraint that code cannot exceed the minimum federal efficiencies. So the idea here is for the Denver Green Code to potentially require minimum efficiencies much higher than the federal minimums. And the constraint for practically for equipment manufacturers is more on the full load efficiency. So that's running, say, roughly when the air temperature is 95 degrees out in the summer and the system's running at full load. But these systems don't run at full load for the vast majority of the time. So the recommendation here is to see if there's a way to, through the Denver Green Code, to incentivize or encourage the specification of systems that have a high part load performance as well. So these I show SEER and IEER. These are just part load composite metrics for the different types of equipment based on capacity. And the suggested recommendation is to require minimum efficiencies at least 25% higher than federal minimums. Now, Denver, currently with our work looking at measures, has also looked at increasing the maximum point total people can get for efficient equipment. So those kind of measures line up from a conceptual standpoint. So I'll go through a couple of these and I'll pause to see if there's any questions. I might need help from our panel if there's any questions from a chat log to elevate them so that I can address them. The next one, allowable fan horsepower. There's fan power requirements for commercial systems, and the recommendation, again, some of these are aspirational. So this one would be also for the Green Code potentially. For systems that run, especially in commercial buildings that run continuously to provide ventilation as well as cooling and heating, the fan power really has a big impact on energy use. So the recommendation here is to set brake horsepower limits 10 or 20% lower than the tabulated values in IECC. This certainly depends on the design of the system, the ductwork, et cetera. But my finding is that for many of these types of buildings, they can exceed the minimum requirements set forth in the base standard. Secondly, and this is something that's been done heavily in Washington State, is looking at approaches that separate the ventilation from the space conditioning. So if you have something called the DOAS, DOAS, or dedicated outside air system, that system can provide tempered air for ventilation needs of the building. And then the main heating and cooling systems, rather than running continuously, can cycle on and off with the loads. So you have potentially a net fan energy savings. This is especially useful for buildings that have smaller units or large numbers of smaller units for individual zone control, where they can use this for savings. Larger systems will typically have variable speed drives for modulating the fan down. So there would be a lower degree of savings for those types of system configurations. And then finally, number 3 here, there's a bit of a gap in the code in most codes, including our code here in California, where there's no specific or explicit requirement for fan power for fans used in smaller systems. So for fans with a total system horsepower of less than 5 horsepower, there's no fan power requirement. So there could be some opportunities to set limits there. The next one, I guess I'll go down the left side and then go over towards the right. For fenestration, this would be, again, a green code requirement potentially. Window performance requirements are fairly stringent already in the Denver code as well as other codes. But with the move towards electrification, there will be a greater reliance on systems such as heat pumps. And heat pumps have somewhat compromised or limited performance during cold outdoor air temperatures in the winter, such as in the Denver climate when it's, say, 15 degrees or colder outside. So the idea here, and this is somewhat of an aspirational requirement or suggestion for the Green Code, is to consider a requirement for buildings that have high amount of, another acronym here, we have a lot of acronyms here for engineers. Apologize if these are a little obtuse. The WWR is window wall ratio, so basically the window area. For buildings that have high degrees of window area and occupants also in proximity during regular occupied hours to those windows, there can be severe impacts on thermal comfort, even with a space temperature conditioned to, say, 70 degrees. If that window surface is very cold, you get radiant effects off the windows. So the potential code requirement here is to require triple glazed, sometimes they're called triple skinny windows to fit with the architectural requirements, but to basically require triple glazed windows for these types of buildings. So this will not only reduce heating loads and heating energy use, but it will significantly improve thermal comfort. So these types of windows are commercially available. They have a bit of a cost premium, but they can be done today.
Hey, John, I just want to intervene here and reiterate that if people have input on any of these concepts, that's what we're looking for here as John goes through it, through all of these. So if you have experience as a stakeholder with any of these, please feel free to write in the chat, and so that way we can continue the conversation about these concepts. Thank you, John.
Yes, thanks, Erica. And yeah, also to reiterate what the other panelists have said, Christy and others, is that we're looking for all ideas that that could be good ideas for contributions towards a green code. Someone asked a comment came up, why triple pane rather than performance values? That's a good question. I think that it could be this measure could be made manifest by a performance requirement. So I'm using triple glaze as an example, but it could be considered as a U factor for the window. Not sure I see the full question here from Mark. Erica, can you read that?
Sure. Question for all increased target values, has market research performed to confirm that current technology can support these values?
Yeah, so there has been some work done. We don't, some of these are proposals that would need a bit of documentation and of analysis to show demonstration of these technologies. Many of these things have been considered for California, which is a milder climate. So we have information on, costs of these types of product as well as performance. But it brings up a good point, which is, the requirement is only as useful as it is feasible. So we're trying to, for the Green Code, even for the Green Code, which is voluntary, we want to add things in there that not just reduce efficiency, but are feasible, feasible and feasible. And so that would have to be shown for a number of these. And yeah, so I'm gonna go to the next one. This one is a proposal. I've had some internal comments even on kind of verification of this as a requirement. There's been, among other places, studies from the Western Cooling Efficiency Center in Interior California and Davis that has done a lot of studies on evaporative pre-cooling, as well as other types of evaporative technologies for package air conditioners. You could have evaporatively cooled condensers as well. But the proposal here would be to add a requirement, or it could be a design option for the DGC to require evaporative pre-cooling on package air conditioners with capacity greater than 5 tons. So these are already incentivized through Xcel Energy as efficient ways to not only reduce energy, but to reduce the peak load by pre-cooling the outside air. Certainly there's probably some limitations on where these are most effectively used, but Denver's climate is especially suitable with its dry summer climate for these types of technologies, and they significantly reduce the ventilation load on the air conditioner so that it can run more efficiently and with reduced energy use, especially during hot and dry summers that Denver typically has. The next one, and I'm happy and interested to get feedback on this because this one is a little bit more of a conceptual one in terms of the concept is well founded, and there's a very strong case to be made for it technically, but as far as how to incorporate it into a code, even a green code, I'm not sure. But Denver and the Front Range there has a very large diurnal temperature swings between night and day. So strategies that can pre-cool a building when systems run more efficiently and have thermal storage to help ride out the temperature load for at least a portion of the day can dramatically reduce peak loads. It can also have the benefit of just helping the building provide more resilience by having that storage to meet the loads and to reduce the peak energy use during the day. There's a building in the Bay Area here that where they actually have used some of these strategies to some extent. As opposed to pre-cooling, what they do is it's a small or medium-sized office building, and they run the cooling tower at night when it's efficient to do so, and then they store chilled water for use in the day to offset some of the cooling load. So I think this one has on a per project level, it has a big potential. I think it's a little harder to codify for a couple reasons. One is the engineers, they're used to designing things towards just straight indoor temperature and humidity, and there's less applied use of things like adaptive thermal comfort that ASHRAE sets forth in its standard 55. So there could definitely be some challenges towards implementing this, but this is just this one's a little bit more conceptual as far as ways to reduce energy and reduce the peak for buildings. And as I said, Denver, with temperature swings often between night and day, 30, 40 degrees, it's a prime candidate for this type of design technique.
Hey, John,
the next one,
comment from Jamie. Both Denver and all Western states will have conservation needs. So evap cooling is great, but we will need to focus on the water energy nexus too. So some water use study would be warranted to value the benefit of one over the other. Just something to maybe consider as we consider the pre-cooling and evap cooling.
Right. Yeah, thanks. That's a good comment. I've seen studies, I haven't done the studies myself, but that say that the energy saving, the water savings from the reduced energy consumption over the year can actually offset or more than offset any water use at the unit level for these technologies. Now I think that's assuming conventional power generation, so that may change over time. But I think, yeah, water use is a consideration for these, for that type of measure.
And just John, we do need to keep moving here a little bit faster, just to.
A little faster, okay. All right, so I'm gonna go through some of these quickly. I think there'll be opportunities, hopefully, for people to review these after the call or workshop and provide comments, hopefully. Luminary level lighting controls. These controls combine daylighting, occupancy sensors, and other controls, individual luminaires. It has a high savings potential. It also carries some cost with it. The other kind of mitigating factor between this one as well as the next one, task lighting, is that lighting power levels continue to drop in codes through the increased use and increased efficacy of LED lighting, which is expected to go in the neighborhood of 150 lumens per watt or higher. So it really reduces the potential for these. I think the offices is a good potential because you can reduce overhead lighting power levels by 30% or greater and just have user-controlled task lighting at the local desk. So you can really achieve some savings there. You can scroll down a little, Erica, towards the fenestration performance. This is a pretty minor one. The ICC has a minimum visible transmittance of 1.1 times the solar heat gain coefficient, SHGC. I think the standard practice for using windows to provide daylighting can achieve higher visible transmittance. So the recommendation here, this would be a minor change, would be to change that 1.1 to a higher value, such as 1.4, or have a minimum VT of 0.4 for the glazing. To scroll down a little bit.
So John, we're not going to go over the ones at the bottom here. We're just going to do the underlined and bolded. The other
okay
that are on the board are just to show what else we're thinking to the working group, but maybe they're a little bit less controversial in application. But feel free to review that to all the attendees today. We're going to keep going through these in consideration of time of just the underlined and bolded topics.
Okay. All right. Great. For the next one, this was, I mentioned earlier, there are a number of optional efficiency measures in the ICC code that has been reformulated or restructured into a point-based system. And each of those measures, whether it's air sealing or increased cooling efficiency, et cetera, has been given a point assignment for towards a target number of credit points based on building type. So there's an alignment that's happening to credit some of these different efficiency measures, so that such that the project, a building project, would have to do all of them, but would choose amongst the menu, if you will, of measures to achieve the target number of points. And the reason I mentioned this earlier is it aligns with this idea I have towards increased HVAC efficiency. Is it potentially gives them additional points for going beyond this 10% better than the base level. So depending upon the equipment type, there are systems with higher performance available. And I think incentivizing those, it's a boost towards the market and a signal to say, we value these systems. So it has a feedback loop potentially. If enough of them are specified, it can reduce the incremental cost for those types of systems. The next one, site energy for Appendix G. Appendix G is the performance rating method for 9.1. It's a whole building simulation. approach where you're trying to verify that your project meets a certain performance target. And the proposal to use site energy, it promotes the use of electrification because of the looking at basically electricity in a more, in some ways, a more level energy use metric compared to other fuel sources such as natural gas. Can you scroll down, Erica, please? Yeah, so some of these were mentioned earlier. The allowable brake fan horsepower. So this would apply to basically to package units. There are good measures. We have one for cooling tower for central systems, but a lot of these focus on package units, which are used on quite a large number of buildings, with the exception maybe of some high-rise buildings and larger office buildings. So the idea here is to recommend fan power limits that are better than the ICC level. If you scroll down, Erica, I covered these two already. Yeah, so this one, limit modeling to Appendix G. Appendix G is a lot of the building code. A lot of the people involved in developing and revising building codes at the national level have been pushing to move towards Appendix G because it creates a kind of a true performance metric where you're not trying to get a % better than some arbitrary baseline for your building. You're really trying to achieve a performance target for the building. And although, Erica, I would like to sneak one in, although it was on the lower portion of the smaller ones, just because I think it's important. It's been done here in California and has been successful. Is the third one down on the right hand side, mandatory minimum insulation. What the concept or the recommendation here, insulation is typically kept as a prescriptive requirement in the base code in ICC or ASHRAE or Title 24 for California. And by making it prescriptive, it allows people to trade off efficiency for other measures, which is very good in terms of flexibility. But what it happens in terms of envelope is it gives people a way to potentially put in reduced amount of insulation, especially for steel frame buildings that might require continuous insulation prescriptively. It allows them to build things on the envelope less stringent than the code. And, this creates some issues down the line mainly because HVAC and lighting are relatively straightforward to change out in a retrofit, but it's hard to open up the building to change the insulation 10, 20, 40 years down the line. That building's more or less stuck with that, insulation performance. So the recommendation is to have a mandatory minimum. It's sometimes called a backstop. So it's kind of, you can only slide the envelope performance so far. So you might slide to either just a slightly lower level than the prescriptive code. So it limits the amount of envelope performance they can trade off.
Great.
So these are some of the key requirements. There are a number of recommendations, that are significant, but not kind of highlighted in this summary workshop that we'd be happy to receive comment on as well.
Great. It sounds like Jamie would support some U-factor backstop. We may have some weird situations, mostly in C407, but occasionally ComCheck, where a small portion of a facade as 0 or next to 0 insulation, but in a UA, DT, delta T envelope trade-off, it still passes. Just something to consider moving forward. I do want to keep us moving here. It hit on the next topic, which I believe is all electric. And so just to please keep adding comments in the chat, and we will definitely review those. Also, just to recap, we will, at the end of the presentation, allow the ability to raise your hand, and we can create more of a discussion that way too. So John, go ahead and start covering the all electric side.
Oh, great. Yeah, so the next one is cold climate heat pumps. This is an emerging technology. This would be more for the green code. It's a conventional heat pumps. They basically lose their efficiency at temperatures well below 30, 35, which if the building's operating especially for buildings that operate 24/7, such as like a multi-family mid-rise apartment building or other buildings that have early morning or evening hours, you're going to have a significant number of hours where the performance is compromised and where a traditional heat pump would use supplemental electric resistance heat, which is very inefficient. So cold climate heat pumps are designed for climates like Denver and others that have a large number of operating hours of between 10 and 30 degrees. And these systems can run even to temperatures below 0. I know when I lived in Colorado Front Range for a couple of years, it was minus 13 one morning, so that's happened. So an alternative heating options can be explored. One thing that's being done in California, and this is a milder climate, but in the mountain areas or areas where we get significant hours with winter temperatures similar to similar parts of Colorado, they're actually recommending the use as kind of it's a little bit of a bridge technology. It's a dual fuel heat pump. So it's basically a heat pump, but instead of the electric resistant supplemental heat, it has a gas heating, furnace heating as the backup or the supplemental heat. And it has a changeover point. So say when the temperature is below 35 degrees, it can run the furnace, and then when it's more milder but needs heating, it can run the heat pump. So those systems, I think, should be considered. Those obviously don't have as big an emissions impact as the heat pump, so the straight heat pump, which is recommended on that side of things. But from a from a heating standpoint, I think it's worth considering those. So just for heat pumps, this is just heat restrictions from place on the use of supplemental heat for heat pumps. So make sure they can meet the full load at whatever the rated condition is. And secondly, there's some of the smaller units, especially those say used in small hotels or motels or residences, where the units have a capability of control where if the call for cooling that the set point temperature that the user specifies or requires is much higher than the actual temperature, it may trigger the resistance heat during times when you wouldn't really need to run the resistance heat, but they want that big bump up or boost in temperature. So it's worth considering restrictions on systems that have that kind of feature to use resistance heating when it's not that cold out. Yeah, so excuse me. This proposal there's proposal for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So as with what we have in California, there's having a mandate for the EV chargers themselves, as well as, and then as a first step, there's making sure you have the infrastructure in place for that. So this aligns with commercial buildings for the 2019 Denver Code towards best policy practices and updates the percentage of parking spaces that are required. Someone made a comment on cold climate heat pump water heaters. Yeah, I think that is potential too. I don't have direct experience with those, but if the heat pump water heater is located in a space that sees that cold of a condition, that could be an option as well. So yes, some of these I expect as electrification becomes more prominent fixture, not only for Denver but for other jurisdictions, there may be other technologies come out for heating. I know CO2 heat pumps have been used in some cases. They require some different design as far as some of the circuiting for the temperatures. So, and then lastly, for electrification readiness, there's a proposal from the New Buildings Institute that adds a new section to require that gas end uses in commercial buildings be provided with a minimum level of electric infrastructure to make it easier and less costly to electrify those loads in the future. Yeah, I think this is not only good, I think it's essential as we move towards electrification to provide the infrastructure, be it on the panels or elsewhere, to allow for these loads to move towards electrification. And it's heating, space heating and water heating are two of the biggest loads, but appliances would also be important to have an infrastructure ready to handle that, because a lot of the savings you get are from not having to run gas lines to the building at all.
Right. So we're it looks like part of the proposal is to add definitions in terms of what is electrification ready, what is ready, and all of that. So that's something that we'll be looking at as we dive into getting the IACC 2021 amendments towards electrification ready.
Yeah, I'd like to make, Erica, one just quick comment sort of related to this, is that, when we looked at this for California's not quite ready to go all electric, but they're trying to move towards heat pumps and using that as a baseline. And in comparison to, say, traditional rooftop units that use gas furnaces, you get a tremendous first cost savings from just, even if you need gas to the building still, even if you're not going all electric, you get a big cost savings from not having to run gas lines to each of the units on the roof. And that makes it, just the space heating aspect itself to be very, very cost effective. So.
Definitely. Don't see too much feedback in the chat as to some of the all electric measures that we presented. So feel free to add as we continue. Let's just keep this presentation moving, and then hopefully we can open up the dialogue after we do run through all of them.
Okay, great. So this is for basically demand flexibility and demand response for the grid. So this is really, it's a funny term, but one term I had, it makes sense if you think of the building in an anthropomorphized way. You want the buildings to be good grid citizens, meaning that the building is working well with the grid and not taking excess demands on the grid during hours where peak energy use is needed. So this first one, energy consumption data collection, is a mandatory requirement for the Green Code and possibly the IECC. That would be that all building measurement devices should be configured to communicate data to that data acquisition system. So, you know, there's an old mantra for engineers is you can't save what you can't measure. So you want to know how much each of the, not just how much electricity and gas and energy the building is using over time on small intervals, but ideally want to know what how each of the end uses are performing compared to expectations. So measurement devices shall provide daily data and record hourly profiles. This is already done in a large portion of larger buildings, but it's helpful with buildings in general to be able to track their energy use. Exactly, yeah. So it's kind of putting the grid as the Kennedy quote. I like that. So so energy consumption management. This is related to the data collection proposal. The devices should have capability to recognize when the thresholds are exceeded. Currently, it's a mandatory requirement, suggesting move to IECC to meet the demand flexibility goals. So, Eric, I'm not actually familiar off the top of my head what those thresholds are, but I guess conceptually it would be that it would be a flag to trigger to note when there's energy use exceeding what the expected expected peak is. Okay, so the demand responsive thermostat, these are already required by some other codes. Would require most thermostats installed in commercial buildings to have demand response capability of adjusting space conditioning set point by no less than 4 in response to a signal from the utility, system operator or other demand response provider. So yeah, so this one's probably self-explanatory. We've seen the importance of this in California with rolling blackouts and relative heat waves the last couple of years. But basically, be able to be connected to the utility to set back key systems as well as water heating and lighting. This would be the same concept at the different end use. So you're requiring these buildings have demand response protocol where they can set back their set points to reduce the energy during peak demand times. So it's a mutually beneficial thing for the buildings as well as the utility to try to manage this when the peaks are being hit. I'm a little less familiar with water heating being coupled or tied into demand response, but if you have electricity based water heating, such as a heat pump, it seems reasonable. You could scroll down, Erica. Or is that it?
Besides the lighting is the last one on the demand flexibility.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So, yeah. So lighting's the same thing as far as all interior luminaires and level lighting controls should be demand responsive controls capable of adjusting power consumption by no less than 10%. I don't think it's demand. If the lighting has multiple levels of control, I don't know that you actually need to have a luminaire level of control for the lighting to make this, to make this demand response. But this seems to be how they've they positioned it. Okay, so excuse me. Next, for powered by renewable energy is one of. Is your question? No. Powered by renewable energy is another important attribute of a zero energy building ultimately, or a highly energy efficient building. This proposal requires buildings to acquire a minimum percentage, 50% of their annual energy consumption from renewables, either from on-site production or Denver's solar support funds. For the Denver Green Code, minimum percentage goal is to offset 75% through renewables and using 50% of the roof area. So yeah, so this is a good target. I think someone has a question on Denver Distributed Solar Support Funds. Can anyone from the panel chime in on what, I can guess what it is, but I don't know specifically.
Christy or Courtney, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it is a buy-in option for community solar rather than buying RECs. You have the option to put renewables on site or buy into their community program. And I think the details are still being developed at this time, but I believe that's the intention.
Yeah, thank you, Erica.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, so either on-site generation or through community solar. I mean, these are excellent measures to make the building more energy independent, as well as use less energy. Then for high intensity operations, such as indoor grow facilities and data mining, to use at least 33% from renewable energy sources. So you know, this will, the 50% and 75% are pretty good targets. I think as you get towards that 75% threshold, you'll want to also consider how that, you know, I'm not entirely familiar with the exact details of any net metering available for Denver, or how the excess production can be sold back to the utility. Congregate roof penetrations for solar, for duplex townhomes and so forth, to be grouped together so that the plumbing and mechanical, all the penetrations can be grouped together so that the areas can be utilized more efficiently, basically, for solar. So it's basically working to make sure that the layout of the roof and the available space is coordinated to allow for sufficient panels to meet the requirement. So this is covering again the other what we had just shown, as far as requiring commercial buildings for a minimum percentage of their annual energy consumption from renewable energy, either from on-site production or the solar support fund for community solar. And then I think I mentioned before, but the minimum area to be set aside for availability for solar is 50% for the renewable energy. Any questions on the renewable side of things?
I'm not seeing any in the chat. We do still have about 45 minutes left in our time period. So thank you, John, for being quick about going through these concepts. So we do have another category on here that these concepts didn't quite fit into the other categories. So if we want to go over those, we can, but I also do want to open it up to people to start raising their hands and start creating more of a discussion now to talk through some of the concepts that we brought up, or even bring up new concepts. I think so. If you have the ability to raise your hand, please do so. If not, I'll also be monitoring the chat. And it looks like Eric, you popped up too.
Yeah, I just want to point out that Jamie has a good question there on Title 24. I want to make sure we didn't miss that.
Oh, doesn't Title 24 effectively achieve that solar zone preservation by requiring a target area free of other penetrations? Is that better than requiring combining type code language?
Yeah, so it does. So they have a free area requirement for solar ready buildings. So that may be a different way of doing it than the Denver specified here as far as consolidating the plumbing, and the other thing is simply requiring that free area, if I understand that comment correctly. I would agree with Jamie.
Great, we'll have to make note of looking at that, seeing if that's the best approach. Well, while we wait, I don't see any raised hands yet. So why don't we start going through some of the code concepts that I've seen being placed on the board. So if we want to go, yes, to highly energy efficient. Looks like I'm seeing some conversation on Energy Star scores and labels posted. I do believe that there's Energy Star requirements, or it might be minimum efficiencies. I don't remember exactly on in the Denver Green Code. But we can definitely look into that. And then looks like we have minimum efficiencies for overall chilled water central plants. Measurement and verification.
Yeah.
Feel free to chime in here, John, too.
Yeah, I'm looking at these. These are basically all good ideas. The chill water plants, I haven't really focused on that side of it. I'm not sure as far as the chiller itself, how much can be done. There could be something done as far as controls, as far as pumping power. So there may be some things. Some things there. Measurement and verifications, that's always good. As far as looking at, I know Denver has kind of looked at the elements of outcome-based codes and the importance of those as far as verifying what is installed is actually performing as expected. In California, we have commissioning mandatory requirements for certain size buildings, and it's basically for verifying that the equipment works. Now, verifying, let's say you have an EUI target for a new building of, call it 35 kB2 per square foot, and you monitor it the first year, and it's higher or lower. It's pretty tricky to try to isolate the root causes of why something is performing better or worse with all of the operational dependencies as far as set points, hours of operation, occupancy levels, et cetera. So that can be tricky. I agree with Jamie on the being technology agnostic as far as fenestration performance and in general. so we probably would want to just a U value specification for their. Are there any other comments that you scroll down?
I'd just like to point out and encourage for everyone else on the call, there's definitely opportunities to expand the conversation around a number of these items in the time that we have left today. We would encourage anyone to raise your hand and we can activate your ability to speak to the group if you'd like to. I just want to make sure also we're not having any technology barriers. And if folks are raising their hand, we're not actually seeing it. If that's the case, please just drop us a note in the chat. Right now, I don't think we're seeing any hands raised. So just want to make sure we're not missing someone and then everyone has an opportunity to engage.
Yeah, I saw a comment flash by about vertical development that Denver may be doing and you know, its impacts on ability to do renewables at the building level. So, you know, that certainly is a challenge. And I think, you know, in California, they've addressed requirements specific for, you know, to the available resources of a building. And obviously there's, I'm not an overall sustainability planner or city planner, but there's certainly benefits to having, you know, urban infill and development from a transportation aspect. So I think that's probably something to be considered about how the renewable requirement will work for buildings, say above 4 stories.
We are also getting some questions in the chat about increased costs and going in cost per square foot for commercial buildings when updating the code. We do not have a study that I am knowledgeable of quite yet, but I do believe that Denver's conducting a literature study to get an estimate of how much an incremental cost is to pursue net zero energy. And right now they're looking at cost increase about 8 to 12% over construction hard costs.
Yeah, and when the state here in California looked at solar photovoltaics for renewable energy, it's becoming cost effective on its own without even incentives. So it certainly has a significant upfront first cost of around $2.50 to $3 per watt installed, but over the life expectancy or the life cycle of the system, it will have should have a return on investment, and that's without incentives. So
just a comment from Daniel, Boulder has included code to preserve solar rights.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reading some of these as far as nighttime pre-cooling could be an issue if you don't have the grid solar on the mix. I can see how that could be an issue. And Jamie's also mentioning with the urban heat island, the fact in say downtown Denver or within Denver itself, that nighttime temperature drop isn't quite as much. So that might lessen the effectiveness of one of the measures I was suggesting.
He also pointed out that the ERV Denver amendments require outside air and exchange heat recovery, I believe is EXH, to be combined. You can't do lots of sidewall exhausts. You have to bring them all together. So there is some inherent combining of roof penetrations already in the current Denver amendments as we kind of consider the solar penetrations proposal.
Mhm.
If we want to keep going with these additional concepts that people have added to while we get more comments in the chat, or again, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Yeah, if you want, we can just look through the comments on the mural and then take some of the chat. Possible local desk. One comment: possible local or desk switching of controlled receptacles for the task lighting and reduced lighting as proposed. I think at certain office things that buildings or situations, I think it does. It can provide a big savings. Excuse me, if you scroll down a little more, is there anything else? No. Yeah, some comments on air tightness requirements. I might have to review those and get back to the commenter after the call to be their response. Something about P, I believe P is for predicted EUI modeling pathway in addition to the IECC CO 407. Curly uses this approach and has backstop insulation requirements. So that might address one of the other measures I suggested.
Great, John. As you go through these, I do also want to ask the core group, to try and help us understand what is working and what's not in the current 2018 or 2019 IECC amendments and the 2019 and the DGC as well. I guess big picture, what can we do? What kind of proposals can we put together to kind of close the gap in between the performance and actual built outcomes? What's working in the field? What isn't? What's hard to achieve? We kind of want to understand those issues so that in a proposal, maybe we can draft and revise how the code is requiring certain measures.
Right. So the one comment about this mandatory minimum insulation measure I suggested or proposed, there was a comment I think related to, well, what if there's a small portion of the facade or the wall has very little or no insulation, but the overall envelope would still pass. I think that's fine. I think in the California code, we have it as an area weighted average U factor. So it's not structured such that every square inch of the wall has to have that minimum insulation. Says potentially consider adding controlled receptacles for the task lighting and IECC as well. I believe that IECC 2021 has controlled receptacles as part of its requirements. I might have to check on that, but Yeah, and then lighting for control of lighting in hotel guest room controls. Yeah, I think there is something in there. I think this was just clean up to make sure there was sufficient temperature setback, and they also had some control of the receptacles in there as well.
Can I interject? Maybe just ask
Yes.
a question of the group. I'm just curious to know, like, what is holding projects back from achieving higher performance besides there being a fear, like there's a dividing line between the things that actually add cost, the things that add cost because they're unfamiliar and there's a learning curve, the code being unnavigable because there are too many amendments. You know, are there opportunities that you're seeing in your work and in your projects for us to start addressing some of those and to start looking big picture? If our big goal is to get all of our projects to this goal together and to get all of our buildings working together towards this end goal, you know, are there district scale opportunities that on your dream list would be available to projects, even if we don't know how to make it work through partnerships or through agreements or whatever? Like, just from a big picture, in an ideal happy world, to make projects perform better, we can put things like that into the Denver Green Code because there are options and electives, and it's just a place where we introduce things, so it's a safe zone. You know, we're not going to introduce something that then is suddenly mandatory for every building and spooky. So I guess I would just ask if everybody could take like 6,000 steps back to the big view again and just think about the projects in that perspective from the high level. Like, how can we get all of these buildings moving towards the same goal, knowing that downtown tall towers are not going to have the same potential as one-story warehouses for on-site PVs or, you know, some of those obvious observations, and knowing that they have to work together. We need your input and your thoughts on where we might have opportunities to make this happen.
It looks like we've got a raised hand from Tony Navarra. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself. You should have that ability.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm with the building department. Just a couple things that we're seeing out there, something that might help us. First off, is everybody able to hear me? I get an affirmative?
Yes.
Awesome. Some of the things that we need to, that we see at least residentially, and it might be something that we can incorporate later, but as we add some of these changes, specifically even to like, for say, table 402411, or some of these other tables that we use on a daily basis, education is going to be our key point. And if we can't educate these guys, we're going to have an extremely uphill battle. The other thing that I would second on that is that we have to be able to communicate with our nationals. A lot of this work is being done from people from Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, you name it. And if we can't get it to our front line, you guys can do calculations all day until the cows come home, as they say it. But the learning barrier and getting it to the community in an understandable and educated way is really the point that I really want everyone to understand today.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good comment. So, you know, kind of addressing the needs of the workforce, the people that are doing the hard work, and making sure it's.
And I guess what I would table with that would be is just as far as being able to see some of those elements right now. And Denver's a big city, so it's impossible to say we have an energy inspection. Yeah, we have an installation inspection, and we're going to check those tables. We're going to check, are they going, you know, which way they're going with their paths. So we're looking at that. But I think eventually, especially if it's a project that's going to involve a green building or a green code, I think it's crucial that we don't put the buck on a third party to say, oh yeah, you did all the cracks, the jams, and all that stuff, because that's really doing us a discourtesy. Our job is to make sure that building, that structure is the safest and most energy efficient for those occupants. And I think that's something in the future that we may want to consider. We may want to say, hey, you know, we need to look at this as well. I understand that you have a third party, but it shouldn't be in lieu of.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, a good comment. I know in places in California, we have a balance. There's a lot of acceptance test requirements for buildings, and it's kind of a balance between having those third-party requirements be as checks on the building installed performance versus having the risk of having too many checks and having them not really followed through because of the checks are too onerous. Great. Well, yeah, thank you for the comment. Eric, I guess I'll continue to look at, I may not address all of these comments, and I'm not sure the protocol for follow-up, but there's some comments posted today that we didn't get to. I think we probably have a means of getting some response or review of these comments.
Right, John, before you continue, I just want to kind of broach the question of, Courtney, if you could zoom out a little bit. You know, as we go through these concepts, just to keep the conversation going, you know, to Christy's point, we do want to hear what issues you're having. We also want to hear if there's anything that we missed, I guess, that might not exactly fit into the highly energy efficient, renewables, all electric, and grid flexibility sections. These pink boxes at the bottom of the screen are kind of just general ideas that big picture, what would you like to see happen with the code? So I'd like to encourage you guys to think outside of the box. How else can we address Denver's goals, and that might not fit into those predetermined categories? So again, thank you, Tony, for raising your hand there and providing some insight. I would encourage some other people to do that as well. Looks like we are getting some comments in the chat as well. Code requirements are typically very specific and must be followed even if it's an issue that is more subjective, i.e. temperature, comfort, and lighting levels. While we are able to change these requirements and easily stay within safe conditions, from a liability standpoint, we cannot change the design to be outside of the code parameters. Addressing this issue would give more options to the energy saving measures. I do want to highlight that on the DGC side, they do have mandatory requirements, and then you select at least one elective requirement. So although that doesn't necessarily answer the question of specifically design parameters, the DGC does provide some flexibility there in terms of how you can comply prescriptively. And definitely something to look into in terms of flexibility for the IECC amendments. And we do have a raised hand here as well from Taylor Roberts. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk, Taylor.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I just had a quick question, Erica. Some of the earlier net zero stakeholder meetings, the city of Denver kind of outlined the pathway of kind of EUIs and where they want to get to that net zero. And a lot of that was focused around a PEUI, a predicted EUI modeling pathway, and that kind of being the goal, I guess, of this energy code cycle we're going through. So just seeing these, I'm just a little confused from seeing that, and then now there's a bunch of options here about, ASHRAE, Appendix G, and I get that can't be the only path, but is that still, I guess maybe Christy's the best one to answer that question, but is that still kind of the direction the city wants to go as far as modeling?
So I would say the city doesn't necessarily have one position on where we think the energy modeling should land, but the conversations that we've had before the conversations that we had before the 2019 code cycle and before this code cycle did center around some of the pros and cons of the different modeling pathways and how we get everybody who's doing the modeling, evaluating the modeling, and building the things that relate to bringing the performance of the outcome in alignment with what's predicted in the model. How do we get all of those people understanding the modeling well, so that when we look at these things and when we create these models, it's hard for everybody. It's hard for people doing the models. It's hard for design teams who are contributing to designs that are being modeled. It's hard for the reviewers to understand the nuances of a whole array of different modeling pathways. And then the different modeling pathways have different pros and cons. So I know before the 2019 code cycle, we talked a lot about Appendix G, and that proposal is up there again. Appendix G seems to have emerged as a more reliable modeling pathway that would help us to get towards outcomes that perform in alignment with predicted outcomes. But we're open to the conversation. We're not defining that answer. That's the majority of the information that's been brought to us to date would imply that. And so it would be helpful, I think, if we can all get to fewer modeling pathways as opposed to more, because then we can spend more time understanding the nuances of those pathways and what actually contributes to a more successful outcome. But that's one theory that is being floated out there. The city doesn't have something that we're trying to drive towards so much as we welcome the conversation to understand what you think also. I mean, you're in the models all the time.
Yeah, and Christy, just to add one quick point on that would be to help people understand, I think, so owners hate that it's when I'm having, when we're all the practitioners here having meetings with clients, and it's, well, this system maybe isn't the most efficient, but it gets you the most savings, right? Because we have different baselines and different things. I hate that conversation. And that's where I love that EUI pathway being, let's just do what's the most energy efficient building that you can do, right? And that's what's going to get you to comply with the code. So I just wholeheartedly love that pathway, but I get there's a lot of issues with it too, but that's just kind of my 2 cents there.
No, and I am supportive of what you're saying on that. I think we believe that if we could get to a point where we're looking at actual energy used as opposed to cost of energy used, that would be beneficial to the overall performance of the outcomes. I think there's been hesitancy from the community in the past to commit to that because there was less understanding of that pathway. And maybe this code cycle, there's more understanding of talking in terms of actual energy used and not through the cost lens. That's what we're trying to change with our buildings, right? Like, we want our buildings to be cost effective and we want our buildings to use less energy. So we should be looking at that pathway, especially knowing that the cost of energy used is likely to change in ways that we can't predict. When it's a mixed fuel building, what is the cost of natural gas going to be in 5 years or 10 years? Like, I'm not willing to predict that. But we know where energy is shifting, and we know that we're moving towards more electric. So there's a real logic and simplicity to considering that pathway. But we need to know what the hurdles are so that we don't say, yes, we're all in, we're going to go just to actual energy used and take away the cost lens, and then have dismay within the development community because we didn't recognize the concerns beforehand.
Yeah. We actually looked at EUI as a performance target a couple code cycles ago, and there's a lot of benefits for it. Everybody understands EUI. Some of the other metrics are abstract or confusing to most. I think there's some limitations of it in terms of knowing what your unregulated uses would be, your plug loads and other energy uses that affect performance. And then Secondly, as a metric, it doesn't, some of the things we're talking about in terms of demand response and grid flexibility, it doesn't really capture the basic principle that the energy use is not valued at all hours of the day the same way. Now that said, I mean, I think there is a place for EUI as a target. The other thing, there's certain things that aren't codified at all, such as like the building orientation or aspect ratio, that could have a big impact on the EUI. But I hear that the comment's a very good one, an important one, because it's an easy, well-established target that's easy to understand, and it's useful in that regard.
So I know some of the people in our group have designed or developed projects that are higher performing than code. And we'd love to know what worked for you, even if it overlaps with some of the ideas that we have on the board. Just what did you find to be the most accessible means to get to higher performance in those buildings? Because those are things that we would consider, more prime for moving into the code and not being just voluntary measures that a few people take.
So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left of conversation time before we'll need to start wrapping this up for today. So I want to encourage additional participation, or Eric or Courtney, if there's a particular topic you want to jump on, or it looks like there's some good comments and feeding coming into the chat as well, that we'll make sure that we capture on the board here for going forward.
Definitely. Thanks, Eric. And it looks like just some comments to read off. Denver is in a suburban jurisdiction where aspect ratios and massing is a very large variable. There's not a lot of choices in that respect, I guess, in the urban area. And then we have another comment that says unregulated loads, treat unregulated loads as priority loads to evaluate alternatives and model, alternates and model. And then it does look like we have another raised hand here from Mark. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. You would like to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Yes, we've been involved in lots of lower than code and high performing buildings. And a big strategy has absolutely been evaporative cooling. So first of all, I just want to put that out there that we should be, on one hand, encouraging, or at least that's the answer to your question. However, need to absolutely consider in our dry climate that if this is being adopted, citywide and more encouraged, what is the effect on water use? And as a somewhat of an answer to that, we've studied that as well. And today you could state that direct use of water for cooling is a net savings due to the water that's currently used in gas and coal-fired plants for cooling. And you see the big plume at, outside the power plants, right? Well, that has its own line losses, et cetera. The direct use of water currently is more efficient. However, the goal of electrification is that the grid itself is getting more efficient and therefore more water efficient as well. And at some point in the future, direct use of water will be more water intensive than what we're doing today by saving the water use at the power plant. I don't have an answer, that's just a comment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of touched upon that, but you're absolutely right. And I think at some point the evaporative cooling or pre-cooling, which is a great thing now, loses its efficacy because of the water issue once the generation becomes more renewable. So I'm not sure I have the answer to it as far as whether that eliminates it as a potential measure now or not, but something to consider. Yeah, I also wanted to throw one general question out to the group, since we're talking about the ICC, but also the Green Code. Are there technologies, measures, are there things that you do in practice that are made more difficult by the code in terms of how the code's structured? An example could be natural ventilation or mixed mode ventilation, or maybe there's some other aspect that that's advanced technology that's been made more difficult just basically the way the code is structured.
That's a really great question, John. And I think, looking at some of the residential code and even the other chapters within DGC, I think we'll also start to investigate, okay, is this how we want to structure the code? And the innovations non-energy side will be happening more tomorrow, but I think that also relates to this side and some of the measures and how they're put into code, and the structure of them.
Right.
We've got a couple of comments too coming through, similar to the insulation backstop. Can maximum contribution to meeting overall efficiency be set for each aspect of the building energy consumption? So lighting, HVAC, renewables, envelope, each can only contribute to 20% of the overall efficiency or something similar. This comes up a lot, how to not allow a building to abuse a specific loophole or strategy or rely on a single aspect and ignore the others. That might be a simple way to manage it. So it relates back to your backstop point. It sounds like it's an ongoing issue during the design process. And then we've got another comment. There are several layers of code, and proving compliance with all of them can be cumbersome or costly. If the requirements were based upon the same baseline system or framework, that would facilitate proving compliance with all of the systems with one energy model.
Yeah, this is a relevant, great comment, because we've had this issue at least historically in California too. And, we're trying to move away from a kind of a completely comparative custom baseline where your project for code compliance is compared against a baseline that might change based on the inputs in your proposed model, which, kind of inherently doesn't completely make sense. So we're trying to, move towards something, like Appendix G of ASHRAE 90.1, where you're just setting a target and the baseline is more fixed. So absolutely, the ideal is to have a single baseline for both ICC and the green codes. So, but you want to also incentivize the high performance systems, basically.
Excellent. Well, I want to go ahead and wrap up the conversation for today. I absolutely want to thank everyone for their participation and engagement, especially through the chat has been a really good forum for us to capture some of these ideas, and for everyone that has added these ideas and concepts and questions to this mural board that we're using to capture these ideas. Recognizing that, the virtual format certainly has its challenges, but again, just thanking everyone for their participation in today's working group conversation. I want to mention that this mural board and the link that's provided in the chat is going to remain open for about 24 hours following today's conversation, so until about noon tomorrow, so that if you do have any other ideas that you'd like to post, feel free to go ahead and click that link and go ahead and add your ideas to this mural board. I also want to remind everyone that this was meeting number 1 of 3 meetings that we'll be having about energy code, as well as the energy chapters of the Green Code, and that we have meeting number 2 next week on June 1st, same time, same place, and that we have meeting number 3 2 weeks from now on Tuesday, June 8th. In the next meeting, we'll be focusing more specifically on residential energy provisions. And in the third meeting, we'll be talking and identifying which ideas we believe we'd like to see in perhaps mandatory or voluntary code requirements. And maybe there's some that potentially are just too big, too big of a bear to tackle this year, but we certainly don't want to lose sight of them. And we'll look forward to advancing them in further code cycles, because we know that this process goes far beyond 21, and we're going to make as much important progress as we can, but we also know that there are many years to come to improving these energy ideas. In conclusion for today, again, thank you everyone.